Welcome back. As you may recall, we left off the last episode well situated for future exploration for the ever-elusive bauxite. I have better armor, better food supplies, and if not better, then at least more equipment at my disposal that will hopefully make the procedure a bit less intensely agonizing this time around. I also currently have way too much food thanks to some seriously egregious farming operations that had no reason to be as successful as they have been. So despite it being the middle of fall, I'm not too concerned about stocking up for the winter. Instead, I chose to turn my attention to, shall we say, more goosey matters, like punching helpless animals and licking trees. Normal things. Despite winter once again stalking me around the corner like that one creepy ex who will just not stop looking at you, I'm not that concerned. I have a frankly ridiculous amount of food stockpiled, as already mentioned, and even taking into account the relative lack of cooked meals from my adventures the first time around, I learned that you can pretty effectively become a hunter-gatherer as long as you keep a cooking pot on you when you're wandering, so I am at no risk of starving. I am, however, still going to do my level best to visit a population apocalypse on the more edible portion of the world while I can, since I do still need large amounts of animal fat and bones for projects unrelated, and, it's something to do while looking for bauxite, which I still need to locate. Now, admittedly, is this particularly productive? Not really. Not at all, actually, because I always oil their hides. So bears are usually fat negative, and bears are where I'm getting most of my fat from in the first place. But if I may raise a counterpoint, I just created a plausible sounding justification to dunk on the bears for a little bit. Is this revenge? Probably. Do I care? Not at all. So naturally, as I am wont to do, the quick hunting trip rapidly turns into a multi-day wandering excursion of bushpacking and flint filching, but that's not all, because whilst exploring caves to the North for teleporters, by sheer random dumb chance, I found this. Did you see it? That little flash of redstone? That, my friends, is bauxite. And this discovery could not have come at a better time. With winter almost upon us, the number of things that we can meaningfully spend time doing productively drops not to zero, but by a pretty substantial margin. No heat means no farming, and either less or zero sustainable forestry, though I am unclear on which because I'm not certain if trees grow in the winter. It also means no easily harvested mountains of grass, which means no mass pottery projects, at least until I get the beehive kiln, and kind of by definition, I have all the food that I'm going to need for the next few months stocked up on already, so there's not much point in hunting or farming. This leaves me with building, which I plan on doing, and mining, which I also plan on doing a whole lot of. Both of these activities are aided greatly by the new addition of a backpack called a miner's bag, which is a specialized inventory item that has additional inventory capacity for stone and mining-related items like pickaxes, at the cost of somehow magically not being able to hold anything else, because yes, there are indeed substantial differences between gravel, which is small stones, and cobblestone, which is slightly larger, small stones. Whatever. With this and an excellent assortment of freshly baked pie slices of mysterious persuasion, no major temporal stability concerns, and 4 pickaxes to my name, the only question then becomes just exactly how much bauxite I can get out of this thing. And while I'm at it, I also check the teleporter that I found down here. It isn't anything special as far as I can tell, it just shoots me about 1,000 blocks north to some bum crack of a cave deep under the earth that is, as with most bum cracks, unremarkable and kind of poopy. I fully intend to add it to the list of places to explore when I have gear worth exploring with, and will forget about it until then. Now, some might come to the conclusion that an entire inventory of assorted bauxite products is, a tad overkill. I would respectfully decline under the grounds of Q. I spent literal days looking for this stuff, and also I will roll in my ocean of bauxite cobble if I want. Thank you very much. But also, yeah, there's not a chance that I am ever going to need to use this much bauxite. And so, with the holy trinity of all things resource-intensive assembled, I must prepare. First on the list, weirdly enough, is grass. The intense heat of steel smelting created by burning pure carbon in a blast furnace is apparently not enough to fire refractory bricks, so instead we must stick them in a hole in the ground surrounded by wet foliage and let them smoke for a day, I guess. Grass gets priority because if it snows too much while I'm grabbing other stuff, I'm pretty much SOL until next spring, which would honestly be kind of funny, but also majorly inconvenient, so we're not going to tempt fate here. Naturally, all of this hard work with landscaping attracts the attention of the local bear population, who continue to be bent and determined on inviting themselves over for playdates, with or without my express invitation. I kind of wish they wouldn't, because my body count is high enough as it is, and I've had a hard enough time keeping this place clean without stacking dead animals like cordwood every time I need to prune the foliage a bit. Second on the list is dirt, with an unusually high opinion of itself, because of course everything is made out of the stuff. And by stuff, I mean clay, in addition to, like, every other material in the game. It's a regular old Stargate run here, folks. I'm just waiting for the required addition of a charcoal singularity for the sake of realistic resource consumption mechanics, or possibly immersion. I forget which excuse we're going with this week. Ingredient number 3 is sticks. Pretty self-explanatory, though I'm pleased to announce that my tree tessellation station is in fact fully capable of producing a very, very large amount of sticks. And also seeds. But mostly sticks. Lots of sticks. Probably too many sticks, if you believe that. I have absolutely no idea what I'm going to do with these once I switch over to beehive kilns. What I don't get from this, however, is what's going on with the tree capitator implementation in this game, because I chopped down one, count them folks, 1 tree, and apparently that was enough to make all of them drop their leaves. Not their logs, which, you know, is the usual thing you're going for when you chop down a tree. The leaves. I just denuded, like, an entire forest with one axe, which was not my goal, but hey, Paul Bunyan, eat your heart out. With all these ingredients gathered, and after waiting just a teensy little bit for my smashing success of an automation station to crank out all the mysterious rock dust I require, I am able to bury 4 stacks of Tier 1 fire brick and once more light the fires of Gander and get things moving. Rest in peace, all of those resources that I just collected. Hopefully we will soon outgrow this frankly ridiculous and inefficient production system, but for now there is nothing for it but to blast the problem until it stops moving, with money, and keep soldiering on.
Anyway, I started blasting.
Specifically, I started blasting yet another quartz vein with a pickaxe, because steel forging is coming up, and I need another building, and as such have a crippling need for clear quartz for aesthetic reasons that definitely are sane and rational, and deserve several hours of my free time. It's a good thing that I like mining, and watching YouTube videos while I mine. And also, sometimes listening to music while watching YouTube videos while I mine. Have I mentioned that I'm a tad bit stimulation starved? I am, for some reason. Can't quite put a finger on why, but I can sure put a pickaxe on it. So while I'm doing this, I also found yet another teleporter within, like, 100 blocks of my house, which is very convenient and would have been nice to know about several weeks earlier. This teleporter shoots me up to the northeast, but not quite as far as the one that drops me on my personal island, and, as is to be entirely expected, in the middle of a deep cave system. Naturally, I give the cave system and its local population a Goose patented welcome prize, and after several hundred mutually respectful high-velocity London handshakes, I can quite confidently say that there is nothing in this cave other than junk, and also corpses. So I'm not going to be paying a visit again unless I need free world exploration. Or corpses, because apparently you can never have too many corpses. But hey, enough stalling. My bricks are cooked, as are my few remaining functional brain cells, so let's get some steel going. By vintage story standards, a bricked blast a cementation furnace is an expensive, complicated bit of infrastructure that requires a whole lot of stuff thrown together in exactly the right way in order to function. I, however, play GregTech New Horizons for fun, so this is pretty much just a typical Tuesday. In short, the core of this machine is a lovely little granite coffin thing. We surround it with bricks placed in a very specific shape, slap a door on it for immersion reasons, and just like that, we have a cementation furnace. And once that's done, we just need to stock it and fuel it. Simple enough. Add a buttload of charcoal. See, I told you that charcoal singularity would be coming in. And iron into fancy layers in this coffin per the extremely insistent instructions that you get when you click on it. Put the lids on, and with the coffin sealed, you can then slam even more of that charcoal singularity under the structure and light everything on fire. The charcoal provides heat needed to catalyze the carburization process, magic happens, and then you get steel. You know, eventually. When it feels like it. Now, the good news is that other than beating the thing overhead with excessive amounts of well-toasted wood nuggets, steel is now just a matter of time. The bad news is that it is a matter of lots of time. Like, a lot. Like, please allow 4 to 6 days for delivery kind of understates the situation amount of time because each round of steel takes something like a week of cooking to complete. So, what could I possibly spend my time doing in the interim? Gee, how about trekking across the breadth of the known universe to go and grab some fancy green rock? That sounds like a great idea. Ironically, on the journey to said fancy green rock, I also discovered literally an entire mountain made out of bauxite in direct proximity to another mountain made entirely out of limestone. They spawned on top of each other. Because of course they did, now that I don't need them. Have I mentioned how awesome this game looks, by the way? It looks really good, even when it's flipping me a double-barreled middle finger directly in my face. So anyway, I wander back home sometime around the 1st of December, heavily, and I do mean heavily, loaded down with enough fancy green rock of various descriptions to add Colorblind Santa to my list of formal titles alongside a not insubstantial amount of random ore that I tripped across along the way. Like the bauxite, this quantity of fancy green rock, called olivine, is fabulously excessive for the purposes of what I'm using it for, which is an additive to bricks, and also like bauxite, I don't really care. If nothing else, it can also be turned into fancy green glass, which seems like a fantastic sculpting material to play with later on down the line, and if you know me, you know that I like shiny things. Steel is still cooking, so in the meantime, what shall I do again? How about further fortify my already problematically iron-rich diet by munching more rocks? Steel is a great material and all, and like seriously, it is actually just really good, but it is not infinite, and my dreams probably qualify as such, so it seems fitting to stock up on all the precursor materials because once I start using steel, I am not going to be stopping for the foreseeable ever. This mining trip is at least made more interesting by the discovery of quartz, and subsequently all of the gold located in said quartz. This is, barring a single nugget of the stuff I sifted out of some sand earlier on, the first gold that I've seen in this game before, so naturally I go out of my way to selectively snipe every single block of the stuff I come across. Like most things, I have no idea what I'm going to do with it, but it's pretty and shiny, which is all that is necessary to convince me. Now, naturally, my first round of steel finishes cooking itself right in the middle of a temporal storm, necessitating, shall we say, violent extraction, wherein I am forced to beat the daylights out of some rebar monkeys before I can actually do anything with it. And, interestingly, despite supposedly being in a red-hot granite box for the better part of a week, the ingots of blister steel are perfectly cool to the touch and safe to handle, which is rather not conducive to forging, so I have to get them heating up and then go take a look at my furnace. As to be expected, the thing is trashed. The intense heat needed to carburize steel is also quite good at cooking the bricks comprising the furnace into fine patinas of dust, and several of them will need to be replaced before I can resume using said furnace. Steel tools let me indirectly make upgrades to the type of bricks that I use for this, so I'm going to hold off on doing that for now. And, other than requiring a bit more beating than usual, blister steel is functionally identical to any other metal when you get it on an anvil, so nothing more needs to be said. Hold, please. And done. With this first batch of steel, I ended up making a whole assortment of tools here, but it should come as no surprise that by far the most important upgrade of the lot is the steel pickaxe. Reason being, as typical for survival games, the upgrade of mining tier allows me to dig up tougher resources despite that functionality making basically zero sense in the context of what real-life prospecting is like. Tougher rock? Sure, I'd buy that, but the ores themselves don't tend to be the thing that you have to worry about. Regardless, with a steel pickaxe, I now have the ability to mine titanium ore, so naturally, I do that. Quite a lot of it. And also, naturally, I realized that I would need steel powder caps to process said titanium ore after I used all my steel to make those tools. So, we're cooking some more steel in the tier 1 furnace, which is fine, actually, because I had spare bricks. This has been your daily dose of Goose's complete and utter inability to plan ahead. Moving on. Much general faffing about later, and my first round of tier 3 refractory bricks has finished its round in the dirt sauna, and I'm ready to start building with them. And the first structure, in defiance of what you were no doubt expecting, is not going to be another cementation furnace. Steel is durable enough that the 32 ingots of the stuff I now sport from the first 2 rounds is more than enough to tide me over for a bit. And even if it wasn't, the lower tier bricks are, dirt cheap, haha. So really it's mostly that they're just annoying to craft and replace. You don't even really need them, since they're just a nice-to-have upgrade, and they're also kind of a pain in the butt to cook, but that's where this lovely structure comes in. This is an oh god not the beehive kiln, named presumably for its shape, because I strongly doubt that any bees or insects of any kind will want to get within 10 feet of this thing once it gets going. These structures are to pit kilns what cementation furnaces are to, regular furnaces, I guess, except that cementation furnaces only make steel. The metaphor really doesn't fit, but point remains, they're a multi-block kiln. You stack your pottery potpourri up inside, stick fuel underneath it, light it, and by extension the pottery, on fire, and the kiln cooks a buttload of pottery faster and more efficiently than the pit kilns do, in theory. It also has an added feature where you can adjust the amount of airflow to change the color of resulting pottery, which will probably be fun later on down the line, but for now is mostly irrelevant because the only thing this sucker is going to be baking for the foreseeable future is bricks, and those don't change color. And yes, I did make an entire another building to hold precisely 2 of these structures. As with everything else I do, this was entirely unnecessary, and I do not care. Bulk brick blasting then paves the way to the next obvious project, bulk steel production. As with the dual-action pottery kilns, there isn't really a gameplay-based reason for this, since the whole idea is that one of these structures should be enough for any normal person, but I am exceedingly lazy and exceedingly not normal, and can't be bothered to remember to refuel my steel burners regularly, so the idea here is that I only have to do it intermittently and can just batch it 4 stacks at a time. At least that's my excuse. A not inconsiderable amount of the reasoning was actually just because I wanted them to be symmetrical, so blame my nascent sense of aesthetics for this one. Now, that does bring up another point, which is that I'm going to need a whole lot of charcoal to fuel said nascent sense of aesthetics, and I, being the incredibly well thought out individual that I am in no way prepared for this. Sure, I have a tree farm, but let me assure you that farm is entirely insufficient for the kind of lumberage that I'm going to be requiring, and it doesn't work in the winter. In the interim, I opted to dovetail my need for forest extinction with my similar related need for massive amounts of pine resin, and went out and hit up some of the pine forests nearby. If the tree has resin nodes, it gets marked on the map and spared, or rather, milked, and if it doesn't, it gets whacked and turned into potatoes. It's a pretty simple trade-off. The massive bounty of wood from this then gets funneled into another new room that I constructed, that is the giant charcoal pit that lives in the basement underneath the beehive kilns. This sucker is, goose-sized, to say the least, and can handle the smelting of 200 stacks of logs at once for, air quotes, easy charcoal production. And if that isn't enough, somehow, I can always dig it deeper. And so, 2 months and 3 steel axes worth of wood later, my charcoal problems are theoretically solved for a period of time. Maybe. I am not gonna lie, I have some projects lined up that will be putting this production to the test, but either way, I have a bunch of the stuff stockpiled now, so we will see. Of course, the less said about the collection process for said stockpile, the better. It is a rare day that I will say I wish I had a backhoe in my hardcore wilderness survival game, but, yeah, I kind of wish I had a backhoe. Moving on, what precisely is the point of having all of this charcoal and infrastructure? Well, more pointlessly excessive over-the-top building projects, of course. And as we all know, any building project worth being excessive about needs a whole stinking heap load of glass, so I made some. Thanks to all of my doomed exploring the past couple of episodes, my flint reserves have never looked healthier, so I cashed in and made, a crate or 2 of fire bricks. Regular quartz clearly isn't an issue, since I have been bulk mining it to get the clear stuff for my custom windows and charcoal. Well, you saw what happened to my charcoal situation, so suffice to say that my glass supply is not going to be running into issues for the next little while. And, just in time, it's almost spring. Yes, we did in fact spend the entire winter doing that. So let's start using some of that glass to make what probably counts as the world's most scuffed greenhouse. Greenhouses, you will recall, are a room that grants a passive 5-degree heat bonus to any plants growing within, which is useful for growing things in climates that are a touch too cold, or in my case, just extending a growing season a bit. They can also be as large as a 14 by 14 by 14 cube if you are inclined to make one that big, though in practice there isn't going to be much point since fruit trees don't grow that tall. Regular trees can grow underground, apparently, for some reason, and most other plants need sunlight. Or, rather, crops need sunlight. Except, oh wait, no, they don't, actually. It turns out there's a broad assortment of plants in Vintage Story that straight up do not care about anything other than temperature, and by extension, the time of year. And among them are my ever-beloved berry bushes. You can plant these suckers on sand at the bottom of the world, unlit, and unwatered, and as long as their temperature needs are met, they will supposedly still produce berries, somehow, which is what I'm counting on. You see, I don't actually care about berries for food because they're hard to store, annoying to process, and relatively low nutrition when compared to the Giga Chad fruit tree. What they do, however, is make lots and lots of rot, which I can turn into better soils for crops that I do actually care about with that sort of thing. As such, I have delicately constructed a whopping 5-layer greenhouse and intend to pack this thing absolutely chock full of berry bushes, harvest them, and stick them all in a box to rot. Or possibly make a whole lot of adult beverages. It's hard to say, really, it kind of depends on my mood, so we'll see. And no, before you ask, hoeing the ground does nothing for the berries, it just turns the blocks non-solid, so mobs can't spawn on them as easily. And so, with spring once again sprung, crops planted, and berries are presumably doing their berry thing, I am now once again free to do whatever it is I feel like doing during the warmer months of the year. First on my list after the thaw is to sling myself to the south using another conveniently placed teleporter I discovered a while ago into a warmer climate in search of one very special creature. And no, it's not wolves, although goodness knows I found plenty of them and you would be forgiven for thinking otherwise. No, today we're here for bees. If you'll listen closely, you might notice that this maple tree is, humming. And that's because it has a beehive in it. Now, I know that I have a somewhat, shall we say, fraught relationship with bees, but let me assure you, bees in Vintage Story are nothing like certain other games that may or may not have caused substantial tendinitis during a certain playthrough, and they're actually pretty chill. To collect them, all we need to do is place an item called a skep nearby, and pile a bunch of flowers near the hive to make them reproduce and swarm into it. After waiting a bit, just like that, we have bees, no breeding required. Annoyingly, this field skep does take up a backpack slot, which means I had to jump some of the random junk at the beehive location, but it wasn't anything super important, so no major losses. That said, I'm not particularly certain I want to know how and where I am carrying this entire beehive in my pocket, but I'm not going to question it if you don't. While we're this far south, I also took the time to hunt down and get samples from a slightly different kind of maple tree called a red maple. The wood is identical to a regular kind of maple we already had access to, but it comes with fancy red leaves, and is one of the things I need to complete my bingo collection of every sample of plant life in the known universe, so sure. I'm not even certain if I can propagate these trees, what would their drop rate, but we'll see, I can try. Meanwhile, back at home, bees, of course, need flowers. I anticipate needing a whole lot of bees, so the amount of flowers I need scales correspondingly, and as such, spent several days doing nothing except frolicking in the tulips and slashing anything that looked like it might be vaguely appealing to my newfound insect frenemies. This is, ironically, the second time picking flowers has been critical to game progression this week, so here's hoping the trend won't last. Conveniently enough, the wiki has some really in-depth measurements on how exactly bee propagation and breeding works, which can be entirely summarized by the statement, more flowers, more gooder. The wiki also has what it claims to be an optimal layout for bee skeps for the purposes of said propagation, except it directly contradicts the rest of the information on the wiki, so I did some testing. Bees, you see, like flowers. And it turns out that they don't actually need to be able to see them to appreciate them, they just kind of need to exist in the general area of them. The obvious solution to making a nicely compacted bee breeder then is to bury a florist shop underneath the ground and put the skeps on top of it like one of those garbage pit turned golf courses. As far as I can tell, this possibility is entirely ignored by any documentation I find online, which if nothing else proves that either the editors haven't tried to do Thumbcraft Infusion recently, or my breeding comprehension is getting worse as I age. Also, no, you're not going crazy here if you think the footage is blurry. Something about walking around several stacks of flowers just makes the game look like it's being played at the bottom of a half-full soup pot. Or possibly this is just my super realistic flower allergies acting up, who knows. From there on, it's pretty simple. Take some skeps of bees, lob them in the greenhouse with more empty skeps and more flowers, sit and wait. There are so many flowers in the area now that skeps should all fill up super quickly, at which point I can then slap down more skeps, and the process will repeat until I go deaf every time I enter the settlement, due to the several million flying cotton balls of death that live next door to me. And for my next trick, I spent the next couple of days doing nothing except harvesting cattails, because wouldn't you know it, skeps need 16 of them, each, and I can't be bothered to harvest them wild. For better or worse, cattails are one of those plants that have basically no growth requirements whatsoever, so I can pretty much just slap them down in any old room and farm them up at my convenience as long as I keep the rhizomes. While my bees are bumbling around... Alright, look, you come up with a better bee-related footage transition. Go on, I dare you. Anyway, while the bees are bumbling around, I'm largely free to pursue whatever objectives I want. Again, after an early harvest of turnips, I already have enough food to last through next winter, and berries and flax take forever to grow, so we're pretty quickly approaching the part of the game where I start doing ridiculous building projects without even a veneer of practical application to conceal their purpose. Almost. There are still a few that I need to make, and one of them happens to be completely revamping my tree farm. Again. The thing about having a charcoal pit that processes 3,200 logs at a time is that it sort of assumes you're able to sustainably produce 3,200 logs, which I am not yet. Hence the tree farm upgrade, by which I mean chopping down every tree present, moving half of the planting spots one block to the south to optimize their leaf shearing potential, and doubling the thing in size because I am easily bored and don't want to do stupid things like wait for my trees to grow much. And speaking of building projects, that also reminds me I should probably introduce to you my granite quarry. The old one under my house, while a much shorter commute, suffered from the twin inconveniences of being A, about as temporally stable as a schizophrenic grandfather clock in an earthquake, and B, buried somewhere between the fourth layer of hell and the bottom of the known universe. And those combined mean that every time that I want to do something as simple as lick some sand off the floor down there, I am forced to engage in a one-person war against the entire monkey population of the Amazon rainforest. So instead of doing that, I can just take a couple teleporters to commute to a friendly foreign mountain range full of all the free-range granite you could possibly want. Now, yes, it may only get to a balmy -1 degrees centigrade in the middle of summer, but frostbite damage doesn't scale with the strength of the temperature differential your avatar experiences, so OSHA is forced to concede that it is at most only a workplace hazard, and that it can be mitigated with proper equipment, like flamethrowers. As you can see, I have been busy up here, and if things continue at the current rate, we're going to be reaching China by episode 11. So I don't hold out much hope for the intactness of this mountain come a few days from now. After allowing the bees to schlorp on their 100% inclusive and wheelchair-friendly underground flower tomb for a few days, the skeps transition into a harvestable variant, and can be broken to yield a delicious sweet insect vomit encased in waxy capsules, which is referred to as honeycomb by normal people. A word of wise to the wary: bees put in a lot of work in combing up their honey, and will be none too pleased if you, say, take an axe to them and steal all of their unborn young to turn them into candles. And that's where the scarecrows come in. Because for all of their ire, bees are not known for being particularly well versed in the art of object recognition, so when you break their hives, they will happily try to attack anything that looks vaguely living-ish rather than you specifically. This means I can smack the hives open, let the bees aggro on the nearest member of my friendly but not terribly pain-sensitive scarecrow militia, while I swoop in and steal the goods. These goods then go in a squeezer. I crank the squeezer, and after allowing 4 to 6 weeks for all the definitely not fruit juice to drip out of the fruit juicer in a bucket, I get delicious honey and a bunch of honeyless honeycomb that is just called beeswax. Now, the one problem with skeps is that, as with the iron bloomeries, these break and replace procedures are not without losses. Each skep I scrap only returns some of the cattails that went into its construction and none of the clay, as far as I can tell, which implies concerning things for the local clay deposits, and I can't really do much about that. But the cattails at least can be mass-produced by bombing up a bunch of rhizomes into a conveniently located farm plot that magically appeared off-screen a few seconds ago. Cattails, like most other non-crop plants, have basically zero growth requirements worth speaking of, though, so it's easy enough. Of course, honeycomb on its own is not terribly useful. Actually it is, just not for what I'm doing with it. No, in order to use it for that mysterious project, I get to spend another few days in the deep underground mining a broad assortment of random garbage that, as with everything else in this game, we will be heating up to do things with. The first of these pieces of garbage is chromium. Other than being a precursor item to create a dye-fixing chemical called mordant, it is largely irrelevant, so naturally I mine the entire vein out because I make Starving Kitten Syndrome look like a Garfield cosplayer. The next ore I need is, unfortunately for me, sulfur. I've been kind of putting this one off, since somehow, despite having wandered over a substantial fraction of God's green earth, I have not once found a single decent spot to mine for this. So before I can do that, I must once more dip a toe into the tornado of distractions that is wandering around the world of Vintage Story while trying to do literally any one specific thing. Case in point, I was looking for sulfur here, in theory. Instead, what happened is I prospected exactly one cave once, saw moving animals, and then spent the rest of the day myrtleizing said moving animals for no reason other than my desire to steal their bones for my farming plots. The end result of this is obviously an entire zoo's worth of deceased animal parts and precisely 0 sulfur. In definitely the same trip, and not at all a separate one, I made after finding out that bears can climb freestanding ladders if sufficiently motivated by several spears inserted directly into the anus, I finally got around to not blendering the wildlife into fertilizer and discovered that my best-known sulfur location is nearby but pretty terrible, and resigned myself to an unforgiving underground slog. That is until I pitched myself down a random cave and found the stuff in 30 seconds flat. So, yeah, we'll take that. I'm not going to get into equestrian orthodontics this late into the episode, so we'll just roll with it. The third and final ore I need, for now, is coal. Black licorice flavor, which actually proved quite anticlimactic to find since I quite literally tripped across it on accident while mining sulfur. Speaking of which, sulfur turns out to not actually be all that rare, apparently. It just looks rare on the prospecting readouts because it only spawns in sedimentary rock types, which tend to be drowned out by metamorphic ones, at least in this area. Black coal, other than being, coal, also tends to spawn with concentrations of fire clay as well, so hopefully I won't have to take a cheese grater to the surface of the planet while looking for flint for a while. But I have found precisely 2 blocks of this stuff thus far, and after mining out the entire ore vein, did not find any more, so clearly there's some definite mileage variation going on here. Now, the obvious question is, what am I going to do with all these ores? And that, I'm happy to say, we'll have to wait until the next episode. Until then, thank you for your time, and as always, I hope you enjoyed.